I used to share my weird experience a lot when I was younger. I was naive enough to think some people would believe me, but most of the time they didn't. They just made excuses saying it was dark outside, I was mistaken, or I was tired, so I stopped talking about it. But after hearing your show, I knew I had to share this with you and your listeners. I'm from the lower peninsula of Michigan, the top of the mitten if you know what that means. Up north you'd call it if you're from Detroit. There's not much up here except lakes and trees. It's pretty though, and we get a lot of tourists in the summer. The winters are cold. Everyone except the locals leave, and there aren't that many of us to go around. So, like most rural teenagers at that time, we used to head into the woods and have ourselves a bonfire. It was during one of these bonfires that it happened. This was before cell phones were really a thing, at least not up here yet, so when we were partying we were cut off from the outside world. Our normal spot was this farmer's field, surrounded on all sides by woods. We learned from the older kids to wait until late fall or early winter to start going there, after the farmer hauled in the last harvest, so we knew there wouldn't be anyone up there. It was sort of a rite of passage in my town. When you were a sophomore or junior, one of the seniors would let you tag along to one of their parties and show you the spot. Nobody got crazy at these things. It was too cold, and we heard too many stories of kids getting lost in the snow and losing fingers to frostbite, but we always had a good time. I'm telling you this because most people brush off what I tell them, saying I was just a young, panicked teenager, but I was in my right mind when it happened. My sophomore year, we were having one of these bonfires in the field. Everything was normal. Everyone was having a good time. We were burning pieces of an old barn and some furniture an old lady left out for trash. My best friend at the time, I'll call him Mike for his anonymity, was grilling up some frozen burger patties next to me in a rusty old charcoal grill we kept out there. Sarah, also not her real name, was standing with us too, chatting away like she always did when we heard a low rumbling growl. I looked towards the sound of the growling, and at the edge of the firelight, I saw two predatory eyes reflecting the fire back at me. I nudged Mike and Sarah and slowly pointed in the direction of eyes, trying not to startle whatever was watching us. We were about 10 yards from the nearest group of partygoers. Sarah was terrified, and she walked slowly backwards to them. She never took her eyes off the edge of the firelight. I don't even think she took a breath the entire time she walked away. I had the exact opposite reaction. I was fascinated by the glowing eyes in the dark. We had been hearing reports that gray wolves were coming back into the lower peninsula from Canada and Wisconsin for a few years now, but all anybody saw were flashes on trail cams or tracks in the snow. The Fish and Game Commission couldn't even make up their minds if these were real signs of wolves or just people mistaking dogs and coyotes. I was excited at the prospect of being the first person in Lower Michigan to see a wolf in the flesh. I could tell Mike was excited too, because as I slowly stalked forward for a better look, he was glued to my side. Walking up to a potential wolf is a stupid thing to do, but I was young and I could hear the whispers and murmurs behind me as Sarah alerted the rest of the party to what was going on. I couldn't back down now. Everyone was watching. Mike and I were about 7 or so yards away from the supposed wolf by now. I could just barely make out the outline of its head and ears. It looked almost like a large German shepherd, but with a broader snout and wider ears. The growling got lower, more menacing, like it was no longer a warning, but an actual threat. I've heard a million dogs growl, but this was more raspy and guttural, like there was something mismatched between the creature's vocal cords and its chest. Mike stopped moving and turned back. I was scared and wanted to turn back too, but I wanted to be the big man at the party more. I wanted the upperclassmen at the bonfire to tell this story next year, that this new underclassman had become a local legend, one that they talk about around the bonfire. I noticed a strong odor coming from the wolf. It stank like a wet dog that went for a swim in urine. I was about 5 yards away now, give or take, and I knew I didn't have it in me to get any closer. I could now see that something wasn't right. I could see the outline of the creature's entire body now, and it was not a wolf. The head and legs looked like they belonged on a large German shepherd, but the torso was human-like. It had broad, muscular shoulders and a large hump of dense muscle on its back. I stumbled back. My foot hit a rock or stick or something. I don't know, but it made a noise and startled the creature. It stood up on its hind legs and snarled. I'm 5'10", and the creature was looking at me eye to eye. Its breath was hot and smelled horrific. I fell backwards onto my butt and scrambled away as fast as I could in that position. I threw handfuls of dirt and rocks in the creature's direction while desperately trying to get back to the fire. The creature ran into the woods while making a whooping howl. The entire party just stared at me in silence. Over the years, that whole incident morphed into a joke about some kid getting scared by the farmer's dog or a coyote. I've even heard a version where it was an unusually large raccoon. I don't blame people. I would probably think the same thing if I wasn't the one who saw it up close. Mike was the only one close enough to really see anything, and he won't talk about it. He changes the subject every time I bring it up, so I stopped asking him about it. Sometimes I wonder if something horrible would have happened if we didn't notice those eyes at the edge of the firelight. Maybe if someone left the party to take a piss or make out in the bushes, this would be an unsolved murder instead of a local joke. Either way, I guess I'm just glad that we're all safe. I've been a nurse for many years, and this happened to me shortly after I became an ER nurse. We had a patient flown in from a car wreck. He was in rough shape, broken limbs, bruises, covered in blood, severe head trauma, you name it. We tried to save him, but he died in the operating room. They declared his time of death, and we started prepping him to get him out of there. All of a sudden, he wakes up and gasps for air. We put him under and treated him for severe internal hemorrhaging. It was honestly a miracle he survived the surgery. Afterwards, he went into a coma, but he was alive. A couple weeks later, I went to check his vitals and fluids. I kid you not. He woke up, looked me right in my eyes, and started moving. He started flailing and panicking, so I called for help. We put him back under and removed his feeding tube and everything. He stabilized a little later and was in awful shape, but he was very much alive and alert. We put him on a morphine drip and had to cast him up, but he looked like he was on the long road to recovery. His family came to visit him. He was eating regularly. He maintained a positive outlook, and he was doing pretty good. One day I came in to check on Miracle Man. That was my nickname for him. He seemed like he was pretty good, and I was about to check on the next patient when he asked me something. Do you believe in heaven and hell? I wasn't the type to waste time on things I couldn't understand, so I just responded, either something happens or nothing happens. Either way, we die. The next day I checked on him again, and he brought up the subject again. He explained that he always believed in an afterlife, but now he believes in heaven and hell. I told him that if I had died on the operating table and come back to life, I might feel the same way. I saw it, he said to me. I felt it. I asked him to explain what he meant, and he said, I felt the heat. I heard the screams. I saw it. I saw hell. I tried to put him at ease and told him he just underwent a tremendous amount of stress and probably hallucinated. His words stuck with me, though. I saw him dead for several minutes. Is it possible his soul left the earth and he saw hell? He requested to be wheeled into the hospital chapel several times a day and became obsessed with what he saw and experienced. Every time I'd visit him, he'd talk about how he didn't want to go back to hell and wanted to turn his life around before it was too late. A few months later, he eventually turned a corner and improved further. He left without many complications and is still doing well. That man found God and became a minister. He felt he needed to uphold something he saw when he died, so he dedicated his life to do well and do good. We still keep in touch, and sometimes I'll go to his services. Do you think what he saw was... It was my job to keep the government's secrets, but what I witnessed was something that I could never keep hidden. I worked for the government for years, and in that time, I saw a lot of things that the public wasn't meant to know about. Classified programs, secret experiments, you name it. But nothing prepared me for what I saw one day in the top secret files. I was going through the latest batch of documents that had come in when I came across a file marked, "Do not open." Of course, my curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside, I found a file on a program that the government was running on cryptid creatures. They were studying them and trying to figure out how to use them for their own purposes. I was shocked. I had always thought that the government was trying to keep these creatures hidden from the public, but instead they were using them for their own gain. I wanted to know more, and so I started doing some digging. I quickly realized that this was a huge cover-up, but also one that was very dangerous. Or at least, dangerous for me to have found this out. The papers listed the location of the program, and I knew that if I went there, I could get more answers. So that's what I did. I snuck into the facility late at night and made my way to the lab where they were keeping the creatures. What I saw there horrified me. They were torturing them, experimenting on them in ways that no living creature should ever have to endure. I knew that I had to get out of there and expose this program to the world. But first, I had to make sure that I wasn't being followed. I went into hiding and started putting together all of the evidence that I had found. It was time to blow the lid off of this government conspiracy. But instead, this is what happened next. I was getting ready to go public with my story when I was suddenly attacked. I don't know who did it or why, but they were after my evidence. I fought back as best as I could, but they took everything from me. My memory of that night is fuzzy, but the next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital. The doctors told me that I had been hit on the head and was lucky to be alive. The police were called, and they asked me what happened. I told them everything, but they didn't believe me. They said that I was just delirious from the injury and that there was no such program. I knew that they were lying, but I had no proof. My evidence was gone, and there was nothing I could do to expose the truth. I was forced to keep silent and watch as the program continued operating in secret. The creatures were tortured and experimented on, all in the name of science, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. So here I am now, years later, telling my story in the hopes that someone will finally believe me and expose this program to the world. It's time for the truth to be revealed. The government can no longer keep this a secret. The world needs to know what is really going on. My name is Daryl, and I'm a psychology student at Temple University. I'm fascinated by how the human mind sees monsters in the shadows, but I've never been a big believer in the existence of legendary animals or the supernatural. However, this summer I had my own strange encounter that is making me rethink my past assumptions. I've gone over the encounter again and again in my head, and no amount of rationalization or psychological theories can explain the physical evidence I encountered. I want to tell myself that I didn't see anything supernatural, just a mundane animal that my adrenaline-fueled mind saw as demonic. But I was not alone in this encounter, and the person with me described what I saw in perfect detail. I admit I was terrified by what I saw, but the scholar in me is persistent, and I made sure to have her write down what she saw before we spoke about it. I didn't want to risk talking about it first and tainting each other's memories of the event. Sorry if I sound like a nerd, but this is why I listen to cryptozoology podcasts and YouTube channels in the first place, to understand human psychology. I guess I should give you some backstory. I was at a party 2 months back at a friend of a friend's house in West Philly. I met a cute girl from Drexel who was an engineering major, and we hit it off. It came out in the conversation that she was big into backpacking and wanted to hike the entire Appalachian Trail after she graduated. I grew up camping a lot and being in the outdoors, so I offered to go backpacking with her sometime. Looking back, that is a little bit creepy to offer to take some girl you just met out in the woods all alone, but she was all for it, so we made plans to go the following weekend. I'm not from Philly, so I really didn't know the area, but I heard the New Jersey Pine Barrens weren't too far, and that they were known for being a vast range of wilderness, and I wanted to impress her. A casual hike on a crowded trail didn't seem like enough. So, we headed to South Jersey for what I hoped would be a cool experience in the Pine Barrens. It was awkward at first, just the two of us alone. There was no one else to chime in when the conversation lagged, but I thought it was still going well. We were about 3 miles into the hike when I noticed a strange smell. It was like someone had lit off fireworks in the area. There was a sulfurous haze hanging in the air. She wrinkled her nose up when she smelled it too. She walked past me to get away from the smell, but she jumped back with a yelp. She looked at me wide-eyed and nodded to the trail behind her. A torn-up deer carcass was in the path. I could see drag marks in the sandy soil. It looked like something had purposely dropped the body there. I assumed we scared off whatever predator, maybe a bear or coyotes, from their kill when we got close. We walked another few miles and made camp. Our plan was to walk a different trail that looped back to where we parked in the morning. She brought a small tent. It was summer, so I didn't bother bringing my own. I just tied a tarp up over me in case it rained and set my sleeping bag down. She probably would have let me in the tent, but I didn't want to presume anything. I slept for a few hours, but something woke me up. My skin was prickling, like I was in dry desert heat. The sulfur stench we smelled near the mutilated deer carcass was in the air again, but stronger. My nose and throat felt irritated, like I was breathing in smoke. My eyes adjusted to the darkness and I saw a shape at the edge of the clearing. The shape was large, at least 7 feet tall. It had a long horse-like head and a thin neck. I didn't see much of its body because I was distracted by intense red eyes. My date peeked her head out of her tent to ask me if I smelled sulfur. She followed my gaze to the creature by the tree and gasped. It screeched and leapt into the air and spread bat-like wings. As it flew away, it smashed into a tree branch 20 feet up and sent it crashing down in front of us. I wanted to abandon all my things and start hiking back to the car right then and there, but I knew we wouldn't make it in the dark. I didn't sleep at all for the rest of the night. At first light, we got up to leave. On our way out, we saw the broken branch and the indent left in the soil where the creature took off, and the sandy soil was still warm where the creature stood. I know what I saw, and I know how crazy this sounds. I often wonder if anyone else has ever had an encounter like this. Well, I've sure got a tale to tell you. I'm still processing it in all honesty, and my therapist says it's better to talk about it than to keep it all bottled inside. So I'll start off with a bit about me. My name is Sam, and I'm a junior in college at the University of Maine, studying environmental science and engineering. I'm a big hiker, and I love to get outdoors in any capacity: running, skiing, tubing, fishing, camping, boating, or even bird watching. It is just a peaceful activity for me, and again, my therapist says it's good for me because it gives me some time away from my anxiety and peace and quiet. I wouldn't say I'm too skilled at bird watching, but I've gotten better this last semester because I took a class in ornithology. There are a few main points to birding that I learned. You always need a good pair of binoculars, and a field guide can be your best friend, but your ears can be your most useful tool. Birds make all kinds of different calls depending on what they are trying to communicate. They might call for a mate, or that they've spotted food, or as a warning, or to communicate directions, or to signal danger. Some birds have lots of different calls and sounds and songs, and they usually have a variety of different pitches and vocalizations along with them. I've memorized the most common sounds here in the Northeast and can do a pretty good job matching them up with the correct bird. I've also been out hiking enough to recognize the look of most, depending on if they're a male or female, or a fledgling or an adult or a senior. There's a lot to learn, and I've been determined to learn it all. I've been going out almost every morning on the weekends to see what I can find. Early morning is usually the best time for birding because it's not too hot for them, and some of their predators aren't up yet or have just gone to bed. You know what they say, the early bird gets the worm. I'd been hiking for about a mile in at Moose Point State Park, and I'd seen just about all of the regulars, some dark-eyed juncos, a pair of winter wrens, and a razorbill. It was a busy morning for the birds because it was the day after a big storm. I started to hike up a hill to get a better viewpoint and maybe catch some overstory birds flying by. I found a path that wound up the mountain and took me to a perfect aerial view in a clearing, on some dusty rocks. I sat down and took a breather. It wasn't long before I felt a shadow fly over me. I looked up as quickly as I could, but I didn't see anything in the sky. Then I heard rustling in the trees about 100 yards away. I pulled out my binoculars to try and get a better look. All I could see was a hint of a black wing popping in and out of a massive pine tree. The entire trunk was swaying back and forth as needles and branches flew out in all directions. Suddenly, this creature popped out of the tree line. I thought it could have been a vulture or a raptor or an eagle, maybe an osprey. But the wings were far too large and its face wasn't like a bird at all. In fact, the most shocking thing was that it didn't really have a face at all, only these bright red eyes that were tracking something down below. It had the body of a person almost, but it was covered in a thin layer of black fuzz. Its wings were huge and spread out almost 2 yards wide. I just couldn't believe my eyes. It started to dart down below the trees, and I stood up with my binoculars to follow it. For a while, the whole forest was silent, but then I heard the bawling of a deer. It was certainly a deer crying from pain. The leaves of another tree shook, and then out of a clearing below, this creature came flying by with a doe stuck between its talons. It was a bit off kilter from carrying its weight, but flapped its huge wings smoothly nonetheless. I followed the beast with my binoculars for as long as I could, but eventually it was out of my sight for good. I sat there in shock for a while, and then made my way down the hill to get out of that forest. As I approached the area where the deer got scooped up from, I saw a mess of fallen trees, broken branches, and leaves strewn all about. Certainly a struggle had taken place. I got out of there as quickly as I could and spent the rest of the day Googling what I had seen. Although it seems unlikely to have been this far north, I do believe that I saw what you call a mothman. It certainly was not a normal bird or bat. I'm going to keep my eyes out for more signs of it, but I probably won't be venturing into those woods again on my own. If it could pick up an adult deer, wouldn't it be able to pick me up too? My brother told me about your show. He tunes in a lot. Honestly, I'm new to this sort of thing, but now my curiosity's been piqued after talking to him a bit. I had my own disturbing encounter with a creature everyone says doesn't exist, so I'm finding myself more interested in hearing what other people have seen and what they think about these things. My experience was last September in Kauai, Hawaii, on my honeymoon. For those who don't know, Hawaii has 6 islands you can visit. Most people choose Oahu or Maui for the nightlife and big resorts, but we are nature lovers, so we chose Kauai, which is known as the Garden Isle. One of the major reasons to visit Kauai is to hike the Kalalau Trail. It's pretty rugged. It follows the Na Pali coastline all along the cliffs. The whole trail is 11 miles long one way, and if you're up for that long of a hike, you can camp at the end on Kalalau Beach. Interesting fact, in the 70s there was a hippie community that decided to stay and live in Kalalau Valley at the end of the trail. I can't say I blame them, but the government came in and rousted them and burned down the shelters they'd built. Anyway, we are hikers, but we decided to only do an 8-mile round trip. In 2 miles on the main trail, stop at Hanakapi'ai Beach, then head 2 miles inland to swim at Hanakapi'ai Falls, then hike back out. It was a day trip, and we only had a week to spend. The trail is beautiful, but pretty strenuous for a couple in their 40s. I mean, the views are totally worth it, but we were glad to finally reach the beach and be able to stop and rest. It's a beautiful beach, but after about 15 minutes, I was itching to start exploring. We were wanting to just relax on the sand, so I decided to head down the beach a bit myself to explore some of the caves. There's a really strong riptide on that beach. The locals have put up a sign showing how many visitors have drowned, but it was low tide, so I knew I'd have plenty of time. I walked about a quarter mile down the beach before I got to the first cave. It was really cool to check out, but not very deep. I realized then that I'd forgotten my camera, left it with our gear on the beach, so that kind of sucked. I thought about going back for it, but I decided we'd have plenty of things to take pictures of, once we got to the falls especially. When I came out of the cave, I was about to walk down the beach to the next one, but then I noticed the path. It looked like an animal trail that ran up the cliff beside the first cave. It looked like it ended at a second cave, set about 30 feet above the beach. I should say right here that one of the wonderful things about Hawaii is they have no snakes on land. They do have a poisonous sea snake. So, even though it's a jungle, You don't have to worry about being snake-bitten when you're bushwhacking. It didn't take me long to get to the opening of the upper cave, and the sun was shining in at an angle, which was awesome. It illuminated a little way in, so I didn't have to pull my flashlight from my belt just yet. I had to duck my head to go in, but then the ceiling of the cave raised up a bit and I could almost stand up straight. There was no sign of people having been in there, no graffiti or trash. I walked in a little further and saw it split into 2 chambers. I hesitated at this point because I was afraid she would freak out if I wasn't visible on the beach. But hey, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, right? I unclipped my flashlight and decided to just take a peek around the corner. The chamber on the left dead-ended almost immediately, and it smelled kind of stinky. I backtracked and tried the chamber on the right. When I shone my light over the walls, there was all this sparkly stuff embedded in the rock. Some kind of mineral, I guess, and I was fascinated by it, running the beam over it up and down. I took another step forward. Something hissed at me. I stopped, dead in my tracks, my heart hammering. I pointed the beam down, thinking, oh my God, they were wrong about the snakes, but there was nothing on the cave floor. Another hiss, and I bounced the light wildly up and around, and then I saw it. The eyes first, glinting yellow with black slits for pupils. Then the thing hissed again and advanced, coming fully into the light. I kid you not, it was as tall as I was, with a face like a lizard, a protruding snout like a dragon, and I could see rows of teeth like an alligator has. There were scales all over its body, green in color. It was the scariest thing I've ever seen, standing on 2 legs, with its front legs visible, ending in long black claws. Scared out of my wits, I tried to back up and crashed into solid stone. My blood was like ice in my veins. The thing looked big enough to eat me. I managed to turn myself around and scrambled out of there, stubbing my toe painfully on a rock at the entrance. I didn't care. I raced down the cliff path, almost tumbling down the steep slope, but caught my balance just in time. When I got to the beach, I finally stopped and looked back. It wasn't chasing me. I wonder if it ever came out of the cave while it was daylight. Maybe not. I was afraid to share my encounter. I just said I saw something weird and I don't know what it was, but we're not going into any caves here. My toe was really painful. I think I might have cracked the bone, so we didn't go to the waterfall after all. We spent the rest of our honeymoon enjoying the beaches, not hiking. I did want to point something out real quick. You know, Hanalei isn't far from there, and there's that old song, Puff the Magic Dragon. Even though they pronounce it Hanalei in the song, it was really about Hanalei, Hawaii, which makes me think maybe there was a dragon legend here a long time ago. If there was, maybe it was based on locals seeing this creature, which looked like half lizard, half human.